Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. It's 12:30. It's the Thursday Bulletin. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm joined by JP Mason and Declan McConville to deconstruct last night's performance and exit again out of the Champions League. It's 4 in a row. We used to do trebles 4 times in a row, Declan. Now we're getting bumped out of the Champions League 4 times in a row. Just before we went live, you were quite philosophical about it, Dec. What's your thoughts this morning, the morning after?
Yeah, as I said to you just before we came on live, it's almost as if as fans we've kind of been preparing for this defeat since February, when Neil Lennon lost his job, and actually probably a time before that when we saw that the wheels had came off the bus altogether. And last night was just a complete failure to prepare, and it's on a collective of the Celtic board and hierarchy who have watched this, fall at their feet and haven't did anything to change it. And as the tagline says down the bottom, they must back him now, and they really must back him now, because I fear that if they don't, I don't think Ange Postecoglou will stick around for too long.
This is the big thing I'm taking from a lot of his pressers now. I often look at a top flight, top class manager, JP, and think to myself, the amount of talking they do to the press, the amount of press conferences, a lot of the time they just fall into the same old rhetoric. I don't think we get much of that from Ange, do we?
No, I got sent a video of him speaking, quite bizarrely, that he was speaking to the BBC from what looked like, I don't know, was it an airport lounge? Did you see the video?
I did, I saw that.
Is that standard practice to interview a manager in an airport lounge on Zoom? Like, I don't know, maybe they ran out of time at the stadium or something like that, but I thought that was really weird. There's somebody sent me it this morning, Rangers fan who I'm friends with. I do have friends who are Rangers fans. That happens from time to time in people's lives. And he was like, "Oh, you have different views on football to me. I'd be interested to know your thoughts on this." And I haven't responded to him yet because I couldn't be bothered, really, to be honest, because I don't know if he was digging for some sort of reaction from me or not, because he can be quite snide in that way, and it's not been pleasant over the last year, put it that way. This is the same guy that texted me while we were 2-1 down at Ibrox, and I was at the game, and he was like, "I hope you're enjoying the bouncy to your left." And then Edward, scored the winner, and then I texted him when I didn't reply at the time, but I texted him when I was coming out of the stadium and said, "Yeah, they've stopped bouncing now." Funny that. Didn't get a reply to that, and anyway, so he texted me that video with Ange Postecoglou, and I watched it, and I thought, what, a really refreshing approach. This is a guy who's walked into a burning building, with a
water pistol.
A water pistol, basically, yeah. And at no point do I apportion any blame to him for that. The fact that we didn't get absolutely horsed either at home or away by that team, who are not that great a side, let's face facts, but we were going into that game with, an absolute, not horrendous, but just a naive and lack of streetwise from the players. Just we weren't ready for it, and he knew that. We knew that for a long time. We knew that from the countdown. That countdown wasn't going towards something that was suddenly going to wave a magic wand and we were going to have a team that could compete in the Champions League. So I thought it was refreshing. Like Declan said, I just hope that there isn't fallouts now as a result of it, because like I said, he can only do what he can with the tools that he's given, and there was a lot of blunt tools.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. See, the thing, JP, I just think we're at that stage now where we need brutal honesty, and I think that whole period of time when we were without a manager, Declan, and apparently we were lining up a manager, and that manager was Eddie Howe, and we really messed that whole process up because we had no agreement. Because, you can't just rely for that length of time on a verbal agreement, and then obviously, because you're setting yourself up for exactly what happened to Celtic. So what JP says is right, and I've not seen any or very few Celtic fans who are blaming Ange Postecoglou for what happened last night. I think we came as close as we possibly could under the circumstances, going into that burning building with a water pistol. But it is so refreshing as a Celtic supporter when you don't get fed the same bluster from the manager when he gets an opportunity to speak. So he's posed a question by a BBC reporter, and I love the way, and he does it like no one else. In fact, it reminds me a wee bit of that scene on Dead Man's Shoes. He uses the word mate, but you know his mate, right?
Mhm.
So it was that scene with Paddy Considine, JP, where he goes,
yeah.
You're there, mate. You're there, mate. So he says to the BBC reporter, and he calls him mate. You know, strong words, mate. You know what he's actually thinking isn't the word mate, and he uses it brilliantly. But he wasn't taking it because the BBC reporter came back for another bite, and I think that Ange conducted himself really well. But what he got through during that discussion was a message. And that hence this headline today. It was a message that he's continually speaking to people who aren't acting fast enough. And he actually says that he's not doing it. He's not being convinced enough. So he's taking responsibility for not convincing the people that we need reinforcements. So it is refreshing, Declan. How long does that last, though? That frustration, like you say, do you honestly think a man who is now, I think, 48 days in the job would possibly say this isn't what I signed up for?
I don't think Liam McLeod was probably expecting some of those answers from him last night because he was very tough on him. And I don't think he got a very nice time, Liam, in the old Zoom last night from Ange. But it was strong language he was using, but we're in a situation that probably merits that type of language at times. But if you look at, it was a really good point made on Twitter last night. If you go back 2 years, the Cluj game, we obviously get dumped out 4-3, Celtic Park, and we go out the Champions League. We then take on the same Cluj team. A month later, Fraser Foster's in the door, Ellis is in the door, and we beat them 2-0 at Celtic Park. Is this going to be a repeat of this situation? We've got Furuhashi in a hotel room. We've got Starfelt, who wasn't in quick enough that he couldn't join up with the team for this game. I hope there'll be more coming in, a right back and possibly a goalkeeper and a few other additions to the squad that adds to the team. But I don't think any of this, to me personally, is on Ange Postecoglou, because he is obviously assessing targets. He knows the players that he wants to bring in. He knows the positions he needs strengthened, but it's not happening quick enough. That isn't down to him. It's not as if this is just a situation that's changed under him. We've seen it on repeat, and it's likely going to be that same situation because we could end up facing Midtjylland in the group stages, and you would see whether there's been a change over that course of time. But like Cluj before, and there's probably been other games that you could take, I feel that that's a repeat of that situation. Once again, being underprepared at the wrong stage of time, and then getting the people in that we need. And it just sticks a sticky plaster over, a situation that, you could probably hark right back to, Legia Warsaw, then Maribor. We got 2 bites at the cherry that year. It was 7 years ago. Nothing's really changed in that time.
I think it's a great point, Dick. And, I'm probably on the side of the argument that would say if we were to play that same Midtjylland side in a couple of months, 3-4 months' time, I do think it would be a different story. I absolutely do. You can see the building blocks are slowly being assembled by Ange Postecoglou, but there is also the other side of the argument where people are all, they're criticising Ange's inactivity last night, particularly with changing things. So Stephen Sloan comes in. Ange has no plan B. He only made one change in the 90 minutes, and it was like for like. The Danish manager made 5 changes, and him and his assistants shouted to the players for the entire game. JP, what proportion of blame, if any, do you place on the gaffer for last night? I mean, my biggest disappointment, I guess, was the way that we kind of died in extra time, particularly in the second phase, the second half of extra time. I didn't have any kind of confidence that we were going to get back into the game at that stage. No.
I mean, I know they were talking up Ayeti when he came on, and Chris Sutton was sort of saying, right, let's see what Ayeti's got. I mean, we haven't seen barely anything from Albion Ayeti in this whole time. I don't know how we possibly thought that he was going to suddenly turn into, Chiesa in the second half of an extra time period where we needed a goal. I did not see that happening at all. I pretty much, because we've seen this film so many times, and by the way, I just thought when Declan was talking, this is like, because we've seen this so many times, it's like the Police Academy series. They're just getting progressively worse. The Police Academy films just got so bad towards the end that you didn't bother with them. And I hope that's not what's going to happen here, that we've seen this so many times. But what I thought last night was, this cannot happen again. This ill-prepared nature of going into Champions League qualifiers cannot happen again. You know, you could give maybe Dominic Mackay a pass because he's not long in the door. COVID, difficult to get players in as quick as you want them to. But we cannot. That was the worst last night that we've ever gone into a Champions League game because of the newly recruited manager and haven't had hardly any time to work with the players. Guy just commented there saying, "Oh, you know, Michelin manager did this, Michelin manager did that. Ange has no plan B." Hardly any of those guys are his players. Some of them want away, clearly still, and he's not got his players in the door yet. He's not had time to really develop his own strategy properly within the club. That's why he said last night that it's not a catastrophe, because it would have been a catastrophe if all his building blocks were in place and all the signings were in place, and then they didn't do anything. You know, if Starfelt had played last night and we'd gone out, if Furuhashi had been there, you know, whoever else.
Yeah,
that's the thing. So, like next year, when we're going into this, if he fails with what he's built over that year, and we're in a state going into next year, then say what you want about Postecoglou, but I'm not having his tactics being compared to the Michelin manager. Michelin manager's at a completely different point with a different team at a different stage in their development, and I don't see how you can throw it at him. I think we did really well to even take it to extra time. Let's face facts. With that defence, that defence, you know, no disrespect to them, because they're the only people we have to play. It's not their fault, you know. Like they're nobody's throwing knives at those players for having failed us. We just didn't have anybody else, and you're asking these guys to go into Champions League level qualifiers with huge pressure to go and perform. The chances of a mistake getting made were so high, and obviously they happened. So
you see the big thing there about the point about the plan B. I'm going to say this: he didn't have a plan B, but I don't blame him. He didn't have a plan B because he doesn't have the players. So you look at the bench, JP. What are you going to do? Seriously, what changes will you make? Well, you can write off any changes in defence because we're already wafer thin there. I mean, the only option on the bench, Bolingoli or Urugide.
That's an absolute joke. You've got a guy who let the whole club down, who shouldn't be anywhere near that squad, and he's one of the guys that you'd be looking to go to in the bench. Yep. I mean, my personal opinion is that Bolingoli should be absolutely nowhere near that team, and the fact is that he is, because of the situation that we're in, where we've not signed anybody. You know,
100%. We said that a few weeks ago. The fact that Tony Ralston, who, by the way, I'll come back to because I had no issue with his performance last night, and Griffiths, pre the latest off-field issues that he has been involved in, and Bolingoli, all three of those players are only still at the club because of the predicament that we're in, because of the poor management of squads, the planning, the succession planning's not been in place. So there was absolutely no option at the back. You'll go into the midfield. You know, are you bringing on Shaw for Sorrell? Are you bringing in Rogic for Turnbull? I mean, these are basically the only options you've got, because then you're looking at players like Robertson, who has very little experience at this level. Forrest obviously was an option, and we utilised them, and there was a change in dynamic when he came on. And of course, the other one is Ajeti. So I think in one way, Stephen Sloan's right. There wasn't a plan B, but what I would add to that, the caveat to that, is because he doesn't have the players. You know, he's looking on that bench, and I think he's looking at the bench thinking, I'm not confident enough to make the change, be that, you know, Edouard for Ajeti, which he didn't make because he brought on Ajeti as a second striker, or bringing on, you know, some of the, you know, bringing on Forrest for Abada. That was probably the only two options that he really had that could have made a difference. I know we still harbour beliefs, Declan, that Tommy Rogic's still that player that we knew and loved. He's not quite shown it since Ange Postecoglou's came in yet. But surely the fact that there was a lack of a plan B is down to the fact that there's a lack of talent on that bench.
Yeah, it harks back to what we were talking about earlier. The signings that he's not got a, you know, depth or quality on that bench. He's got really nobody to turn to, and you saw the bare bones when we had pre-season games, and that obviously when the Scotland players were away, he couldn't turn to them. So the teams that we were fielding, and then last night we finished with a back four of Ralston, Welsh, Murray, and Montgomery. that isn't on the manager. That is on the people at the top, not because we all knew we needed a right back. You know, Lustig, when he left the club, he was an experienced player, a big character in the dressing room.
Yeah.
His legs were gone. It was fine to sell him, but you need to replace him. We brought in a young player from Manchester City in Frimpong. Yes, we made money off him, and we brought in El Hamed, who obviously departed the club. We benefited financially off Frimpong. What did we replace him with? A loanee from Everton. So since Lustig's left the building, no replacement. You know, Ayer's replacement comes in eventually when Ayer leaves the club, so we've waited. It's the same old story every single time, Paul. Just, you know, that inability, as well as that. Julian hurt his knee against Dundee United in late December. That was 7 months ago, and we still haven't signed a replacement centre-back to cover that position. We knew in December that we needed another centre-back in the door, and we never bought one. We turned back to near Beaton and looked to trust the two young guys. Not their fault, but that's what happens when you prepare to fail. So it's not in the manager that squad's so light. It's on the board because, as he said, you know, they've not listened to him when he's wanting to bring in players, and that isn't down to him. It's not on him. So I think he's freer, you know, responsibility. And that's probably something the Celtic board won't like, that they've got no shield now, because last season they did have a shield. They don't have a shield this season. And I think Postecoglou is going to be really honest, and there'll be a few home truths that a few of the guys in suits won't like.
I think that's a great point. Really well made, Declan. Postecoglou, you know, is not going to be the fall guy at this stage. JP, the words that he used was, "I haven't done a good enough job convincing people we need to bring people in." Now, sitting here, JP, surely that board realises that you don't go into a European game, a Champions League qualifier, and rely on an 18-year-old Dane Murray, who, and I keep reiterating this, I thought played extremely well under the circumstances, both last night and in the first leg. You don't give him his first senior start in a Champions League qualifier. I mean, you've heard the situations previously, JP, where there's been an outbreak of some kind of illness, or there's just an incredible misfortune when it comes to injury. And, you know, we have seen that in the past. That's not where we are just now. As Declan says, the issues around the centre-half position have been at least evident since December, when Julian got, and probably before then, when we realised that the signing of Duffy wasn't working out, JP. So surely, you know, those words, and I know that we do, you know, we really look at every nuance at Celtic Football Club and we read into everything, but those words, he's not convinced the people we need to bring people in. Surely they weren't prepared to go into that burning house fire with a water pistol, JP.
Well, I mean, I think they seem to think that was, you know, pointing fingers and saying, oh, well, you know, we've made efforts or whatever, or we've tried. But I looked at this last night, sort of late on. I started thinking about the Celtic managers in the last few years, and, you know, who's been responsible for recruitment. Whoever, at some point midway through Brendan Rodgers' tenure, summer 2018 was when it changed. So, see, every signing from summer 2018 onwards, I can hear that noise. Can you hear that noise?
What is it?
Like a shuffling noise. Sorry, I don't know if it's me or what, but I'll try and stay completely still so that
I'm good. I can't hear it, so it's fine.
Okay. And so I was thinking about the summer transfer window of 2018. That was the last time I think that Brendan Rodgers had an actual say in the signings. Because now, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Cham came in that window. I think
17.
Was it 17? Yeah. Right, okay, I've made a mistake there then. But I think summer 2018, just looking at the transfers in that window, beyond that was when it started to change. Winter of 2019. When did Compere come in?
January 2018, I think. I'm sorry.
Was it?
January 2018, yep.
Was it? Right.
Yep, because he played against Morton in the March 2018.
Right, it's the January 2018 transfer window when things started to change. Whoever started to change the recruitment and wasn't involving Rodgers, and there weren't Rodgers signings, that changed at that point, and it's changed ever since, because you can be guaranteed that the signings that came in when Neil Lennon was manager were nothing to do with Neil Lennon. They were just presented to Neil Lennon and he was expected to work with them. And they've, by and large, been pretty bad. There's not been many good ones, is there? I mean, you can't Can you really remember any good signings in the last 2 or 3 years?
Well, you've got me looking, and I'm looking at the incomings, JP, just because obviously Declan's got a sharper brain than me when it comes to dates. But I'm going back to 2018. We're looking at players such as Scott Bain, Edouard, Izagiri, Arzani, Malumbu, Benkovic, Burke, Wade, Bayo, Sved, Gutman, Perez, Toyan. So there really is a trajectory, isn't it? And it's a downward scale. And I think it continued on that scale ever since, hasn't it? Really, there's been a couple of exceptions. I think we got a wee bit lucky with Frimpong. I mean, obviously, but there's been a couple of exceptions. But generally speaking, I wouldn't disagree with that, to be honest with you, JP. And I think
which has led us to this point, of having to field a team with inexperienced young players and a mixture of players who don't want to be here because they've not been sold at the right time, and it's been bad, poorly managed, poor squad management from the top. As soon as a player's indicated he wants to leave, then they should just be going all out to get him out the door. None of this, stay for 10 in a row or stay for 9 in a row or anything like that. That shouldn't even come into it. If a player genuinely is wanting to go, I really don't understand the argument of trying to keep him. And again, we've had to field players last night who we understand may or may not want to go. And do you know what? It says a lot about Postecoglou that they actually played for him, because I thought Ryan Christie played. I don't have any qualms about Ryan. I've bashed Ryan Christie in the past. I'll admit that, because I didn't think he was, giving it his all. But I can't fault him. But there's only so much one player or a couple of players can do. If your entire defence is fragile, then you're definitely going to struggle.
Now, let's talk about some of the players then. Declan Strangelove, the doctor, comes in to say, before the pylon starts on every Celtic player, I would just like to say, please try and show a little patience for Ange and the boys. There are no quick fixes in this game. I think it is important to look at one of the points JP made there, certainly on the Ryan Christie front. There were some decent performances. Now, I've already mentioned, and I mentioned last night following the game when emotions are high, that the very fact that we're having to give an 18-year-old his first competitive start in the Champions League qualifier is on the board, and I stick by it. But he played particularly well, Declan. I think there was one point last night where he's made a slight error, nothing came of it, but he's booted the ball out the park where there was a couple of easy passes on. He done so well, but not every player responds in that way when they're thrown in to a situation like that. I think Welsh, I had concerns last season when Welsh was thrown into the Celtic team when we were low on confidence, we weren't getting the performances, and we were playing Rangers and we throw Welsh in. I think he's done particularly well to come through that. He's maybe 23, 24 games into his Celtic career now. And even when we do bring in another centre-half, I think Welsh will play plenty of games. But let's start talking about some of the performers. Last night, I actually echoed what JP said, when I was talking about Christie, because my co-hosts didn't agree with me. They didn't think that Christie had a great game. I thought he worked really, really hard. He seems a lot more disciplined because previously Christie was all over the park, but not in a good way. He was spreading himself too thinly. I think last night it was a very disciplined performance. There was a couple of occasions where he played through balls that almost created an opportunity. I still think he's creative. If he's a guy who wants to leave Celtic Park, I think he's still approaching it in a better way than, let's say, Odsonne Edouard, because he was the other end of the scale for me, and I thought that was a really poor performance by Eddie. Are we right to continue to persevere with Edouard, Declan, or is it a matter of time before he leaves the club in any case?
I think, again, last night is down to not having anybody else to play, because JP said, when Ayeti came on, we were hearing all this bluster about, come on and change the game, and he never really did anything for me. So we persisted with him in pre-season. He still a good couple of goals, but I think, again, Ange having to play Edouard and Christie is down to, a lack of depth in the squad, and I know the players been in the team. And to hark back to what JP was saying earlier on about transfer windows, we're still in a situation here. Yes, we've got a manager in, but we have no head of football operations, director of football, whatever you want to call that role, somebody who is in control of the transfers. When Nicky Hammond left the club, we've still not replaced him. So again, we're heading into a new season here with still a massive gap in, in that kind of machine system, like if you like, of how signings get done, that you've got a head of football operations that oversees the whole project that the manager can go and talk to, which is again on the board not having somebody in there and not appointing somebody to that position, because it's key, it's crucial. You see how well other clubs have did with that, particularly the other team on the other side of the city with their appointment there to bring in players. So that again is on the board, but for the young guys that came in last night, I thought they did particularly well because they're getting put into environments they just shouldn't have to be put into, and they did nothing really to let us down. Because again, I don't think last night's failure is in the 11 guys in the park. It's a lot deep rooted than that.
It is, and we will speak about some of the areas that the club are actually failing, and it's nothing new. I mean, we're talking about 4 Champions League campaigns: AEK Athens in 2018, Cluj, Ferencvaros, Midtjylland. Now, the last 2, last season and this season, the club were in disarray. Previous to that, were dominating Scottish football. No one in any level of business can plan that we're going to enter these 4 group stages so underprepared, JP. I mean, we can't be so naive that anyone would plan that. Do they honestly think that we could get away with what we've got? And I don't just mean this season. You can go further back where we've got Julien and Bolingoli on the bench against Cluj and Callum McGregor playing left back. We've got £10 million worth of player on the bench. And we bounce out to Cluj unsurprisingly. And as Declan says, we proved later on that season that we were a better side. We were just terribly underprepared. So if there is a group of people in that boardroom who think that we're okay to enter these rounds or this level of competition 4 years in a row, so underprepared, then surely their positions within Celtic Football Club are untenable.
100%. 100%. It's completely on them. They make the decisions. They've saw us through to this. You can talk all you want about quadruple trebles and everything else, and that is unprecedented, and it was an amazing experience and will live with me forever. But all these bouncing out of Europe moments will live with me forever as well. And it's so frustrating because you see Callum McGregor last night scores an absolute worldie, right? One of the best Celtic goals I've ever seen. That might be over the top. I don't know. I might still be, on cider fumes. I don't know, but I thought it was a phenomenal strike, great hit, and then you think, wow, here we go, that we actually might do this, and it would be. Let's not mince our words here. If we had got through last night, that would have been a Herculean effort and result, given what we had there. So I don't want them to point to that and go, well, we ran them close and it was just unlucky in the end. No. That should have been put to bed. That tie should have been put to bed. They weren't a great side. Everybody knows it. Sviatchenko is their captain. No disrespect to him, but we should have taken care of them. So we should have been in a position as Celtic, regardless of the fact that we're not the champions, we should have been in a position to dispatch them. What would have been in the next round against PSV. I don't even know the score from last night and what PSV did to Galatasaray.
2-0 they won away.
2-1. 7-2 in aggregate.
7-2 in aggregate, right. Well, I mean, that would have been terrifying, going up against Mario Götze and Zahavi. I'm pretty sure, it would have made last night seem like a bun fight. Do you know what I mean? We would have been absolutely massacred in that game. I'm sure we would have been, but maybe we'd have had a couple of players in the door for those ties. Who knows? They're next week or something like that. So even then, nobody's going to be bedded in really for those ties. But right now, as a line in the sand, as of next season, this nightmare scenario that we have lived through so many times cannot happen again. Otherwise, it is heads rolling time, and we've got to give the guy time to get the players in that we've signed. Hopefully, sign more. But the worrying thing is the league kickoffs on Saturday night. It's not as if it's in a couple of weeks' time. These games seem to come earlier and earlier all the time, and they've come earlier because of the result of the league standings last season. And as Russell pointed out on another show, this was a moonshot for us. We shouldn't have even been in this position. It was an absolute lucky dip, almost, the fact that we got the chance to go have a crack at the Champions League. We could have guaranteed ourselves Europa League last night if we'd have qualified past them. We've got another opportunity against Jablonec, is it, next week? So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully get players in the door for that. But this board, as you said, and see, for all these people that I've seen online going, oh, here we go, the Celtic fan media being negative and blah, blah, blah. What are you saying now? Seriously, what are you saying now? Is there any defence that you have over this situation? Because I'd really love to hear it. Because, I mean, we've been saying this for ages. We've not been coming on here to be negative for the hell of it, but it's been staring us, screaming at us in the face. And all last night did was just sign the letter and put it in the post.
See, the thing, JP, right? You're absolutely spot on. And this isn't a poor me and all this kind of stuff. Because do you honestly think I wouldn't rather be sitting here talking about a victory last night, the age of Ange, progress? Because 100%, I know every single person involved in ACSOM would rather that was the case. I was talking to my mate David just before I came in. What are you going to talk about in the bulletin today? And I was like, well, unfortunately, we're going to have to strip away what happened last night again. Now, we've got the post-match, Declan, which, I've done enough for them now. We've covered every game last season to know that you've got to check yourself before you come on live because emotions running high, disappointment and everything else. But I was quite scathing. I've got to say I was scathing of the board last night. And to be honest with you, I stand by every single word that I said last night. Jungle Lion comes in and makes a point. If the Green Brigade have a banner out before Saturday, it will make the board more stubborn to do zero. I know exactly what he's saying here because there was a point last season where I felt the board were being stubborn or the club were being stubborn because they didn't want to bow down to the demands of the Celtic support. And I felt that they would have felt at that time that that influence is something that had they allowed the Celtic support to have such an influence, they might never have wrestled that power back. So they refused to act. And that, the famous or infamous incident after the Ross County game is the example I'm referring to. It's going to be a wee stage further than that, because one thing Neil Lennon certainly didn't do during all that was criticise the board or criticise any individual above himself at the club. Ange has done that. He's done it last night. He's hinted at it previously. Surely his voice is enough for these people who make the decisions in the highest reaches of Celtic Park to actually realise that we cannot rest on our laurels any longer. Massive changes, not just in the playing side, must be made, and they need to be made immediately. I mean, we were calling for the changes weeks and months ago. So this really is a huge indication that it's gone beyond frustration within the supporters when the manager's calling you out in the post-match interviews.
Well, Postecoglou was the board's man after 106 days of waiting. So if his voice doesn't cut through, nobody's will. Because at that situation last year, they were able to kind of double down and batten the hatches. And as I said earlier on, that shield that they had maybe protecting them a bit in front of them of no criticism is gone. That the manager and the support are now turning against them. So if that voice doesn't cut through to make any changes in terms of personnel coming in the door and other things, nothing will. And, where we go from that is beyond me, because we're in a situation here now that is getting worse. And if things don't start to properly change, I don't know where we go from here. Really don't. But his voice, I would hope, and I really, really hope that it would cut through to them, that now that's been made public, they need to act and give him what he needs. But I mean, we're seeing stories in the week that Dermot Desmond's going to get involved in transfer dealings. Don't need to get involved, Dermot. Just give us the money and let the manager go and buy who he wants to. That's all we need. But if that doesn't happen, as I said at the top of the show, I fear that the manager will walk out on them because I don't think he'll accept this.
One of the points, JP, that I was making last night was around the fact that, as Declan quite rightly said there, Dermot Desmond comes out or feeds a specific paper or a couple of papers, a story that he's going to step in and changes on the playing side and the recruitment side are going to be made. Would it not be better if he sorted out the lacklustre nature of the boardroom at Celtic Park? I mean, for years and years, we know that the figurehead of that boardroom was Peter Lawwell, and the influence that he had at Celtic was incredible. So much so that when they start to unfurl banners of certain board members outside Celtic Park, a lot of fans didn't even know who they were. They were so anonymous. They had played no real part in any massive changes or decision-making processes, it would appear to us on the outside looking in. Surely Dermot Desmond needs to prioritise that, and as Declan says, let the football heads get on with the football department.
Yeah, I think a major assessment has to be done of roles and decision making that has been made. As much as you want to criticize, sometimes people criticise the Green Brigade. I have been a bit critical of them in the past for certain things, but I think I'm just a guy in the stadium. I'm not part of the Green Brigade, or I think it's good though that they've energised and vocalised the Celtic support and created an atmosphere at games home and away. So I just sort of rubberneck along and look and see what's the banner this week, or some of the banners they've done have been absolutely unbelievable, particularly in Europe. But
sensational.
Yeah, but I remember looking along and seeing during, I can't remember, I think it might have been 2019 or it was either 2018 or 2019, and they had their usual font, and it was, "This is how it feels to be Celtic." This is how it feels to be Celtic. It didn't say champions again. Downsizing again, as you know. The Celtic board are gambling 10 in a row. Right. I googled it last night and found it because I could remember. I knew it was something along those lines. And so, anybody that says that nobody's been saying this and nobody's been pointing this out, it was pointed out by the major fan group within the Celtic support. And probably a lot of the people in the ground agreed with that. It's not as if that comes out and then everybody votes and goes, "Oh yes, I agree with that sentiment." But I agreed with it because I could see the way that things were going with the signings that were being made. That has led us to this point. Absolute kamikaze signings, giving guys contracts that didn't deserve contracts. Marvin Comper, I mean, come on, like really? Like that's an insane signing. Whoever scouted that guy should never work in football again. And I'll go on record saying that.
I'd go a stage further. I mean, to spend that kind of money, JP, and get 60 minutes out of the footballer against lower league opposition in a cup game must rank as one of the worst signings ever in Celtic's history. I mean, listen, you can't even base it on ability because we've only seen 60 minutes of the guy. So terrible bit of business. But going back to these warnings, and you're spot on, and I think Celtic have a history in terms of the fan base of being able to call out things pretty early on. I mean, we obviously have the absolute privilege of speaking to Jim Moore on a regular basis. Him and his cohorts were basically alerting Celtic fans to the fact that there were issues at the club in the early 1990s, a good few years before Celts for Change and Fergus McCann's takeover, etc. So Celtic fans have always called. I always remember reading the fanzines back in the day, Declan, in the 1980s, and being amazed because it's easy if Celtic win the double in 1987-88 to get intoxicated by that success and that team. With McAvenny and McStay, a great side to watch at that time, and not look, under the bonnet and say, why is this club not competing on a financial level with our greatest rivals at that stage? Why has this club got a stadium which is not fit for purpose? But the fanzines were asking the questions. We've always had a number of voices in the Celtic support who have been quick to notice that there was a rot. But at the same time, I don't always blame supporters, especially when the success is there, Declan, because you trust the custodians at the club who are being paid handsomely to fulfil their role to identify it before we do. You would trust that, but it's not happened. How do you think this will progress in relation to, because it seems as though the distrust that the Celtic fans have at the moment in the current incumbents of the Celtic boardroom is not going to improve anytime soon.
Yeah, and as I said, I don't know how that changes. I mean, obviously, the Celtic Trust is a vehicle for that, but to me, if there was going to be any major change in the boardroom, or Dermot Desmond would either be a parting of the ways to hand it over to his son Ross, or somebody else, the only person I can really think of that probably could buy out Dermot Desmond would be Willie Hockey, but I don't know if he'd be the person that would want to do that. So, I don't know where this situation goes if, doomsday comes, say Postecoglou walks out, the growing, the Celtic board can't escape like they did last year, because people will be in the stadium. There will be people shouting, there will be banners, people will be booing. So if things don't change, that's the situation. If there was going to be any kind of major change there, because I just can't see, unless Ross Desmond comes in and Dermot hands it over, changes in the boardroom as quick as we want. Guys like Tom Allison and Brian Wilson have been there a long, long time. It's too cosy. It's, and as you said that earlier on, Peter Lobel was the figurehead of that. He's gone now. And is it just, let the executive team run it and the rest just kind of say, okay, that's fine, we trust you, just get on with it? But I don't know where this goes in terms of a long-term plan, whether it's that Ross Desmond taking over from his father, or a fans group, mobilising and then somebody willing to put up the cash for it. But I don't know, unless anybody knows any multi-millionaires that fancy a football club, then be my guest. But I don't know where it goes at this point in time.
I found it interesting that one of the names Declan mentioned there, Willie Hockey, his name has popped up in conversations over the last week or so. JP, what it'll show me, I don't know whether or not there's any truth in that, but what it does show is that there are people out there with not only the business acumen, JP, but the creative nature to modernise. This is a big word we keep hearing from Dom Mackay, but in order to modernise, you can't use the same out-of-touch figures who are at the club and who have got very, very comfortable at the club. You can't modernise them. You can't change the way that they work. You can't implement creative business strategies in their minds. You can't allow them to have a different attitude towards the Celtic fan base, because currently it feels as though all we are is good for is season ticket sales and merchandising sales, and you will just go along with this and you won't question us. You can't modernise that way of thinking, JP, and that's why that kind of level of change will be required before, as a club, not just on the playing field, but when we're talking about strategic decisions, when we're talking about restructuring, modernising a football club or any business, you can't do it with the same staff.
And you certainly can't do it in the number of days that Dominic Mackay has been in charge. I think maybe some people would maybe be naive to think that you can do that. I've never been in charge of an organisation. I've never been in charge of any real organisation. I booked gigs at a club in Edinburgh. It was a 250 capacity club, so I was part of the responsibility of that. But I've never been at the head of an organisation like Celtic. So, but I can only imagine that right now it's like steering a massive oil tanker, back on course, and it's going to take a lot of time for that to come back into line. And that's why I don't really think that the blame could be laid at Dominic Mackay's doorstep, because I think if he's listening to this or watching this, I think he'll be agreeing with a lot of the stuff that we say. How could you not be? The evidence is there. It's not like we're providing evidence of all this major success in Europe. We get cockholed every single season, and it's actually almost laughable how insane it is that we have found ourselves in this position. So yeah, I think it's the whole thing has to be looked at and streamlined. And like I said before, we cannot be in this situation in a year's time. We have to have some sort of calm. And the other thing as well is, and it is something to worry about, Postecoglou walked out on his country because he didn't like the way. That's his country. You know what I mean? Like one of the highest honours you can have. And he didn't do it just because he didn't like the colour of the strip, or, there was obviously fundamental problems going on there. Much the same way as Roy Keane walked out on Republic Island. I'm pretty sure Roy Keane didn't really want to walk out on Republic Island, but was so disgusted with the standards and everything else, and he was comparing it to Manchester United.
It was unworkable for him.
Comparing it to Manchester United, and people will rightly or wrongly give him a hard time for that. Postecoglou walked out on Australia. I don't know the full details of why he did that, but I know that he did it. So I know that when it comes to something like this, if he isn't getting the backing and the support that he thinks he should, then I would find it strange if he didn't get it from Dominic Mackay. I don't really know how the whole boardroom thing works and how everybody signs things off and all that sort of thing. But they're at the top of the tree, and they're responsible for everything that's happened beneath them. So, yeah.
You know, the big thing as well, some people say that you overreact. You know, if it was a one-off, this might be an overreaction. But as we keep saying, it's year on year, same issues, same mistakes being made. And by the way, you can mark your words. Absolutely, if this kind of platform was around back in September, August 2002, when we bounced out to Bâle in the Champions League qualifier, would still be giving Martin O'Neill and his team a hard time. Of course you would, because that's what happens. And yes, we went on to have a fantastic European campaign, albeit it ended in defeat in the final. But yeah, you would have reacted with what you saw in the park. I mean, you know what I mean, JP? You looked at that Bâle result, having beaten them 3-1 at home, as a bit of a disaster. I didn't want to use the word catastrophe or catastrophic, because obviously Ange doesn't like that. And I don't want Ange calling me mate. I want him to call the board members mate in that way that he does, as if it's dead man's shoes. But, you know, you react to the situation. At the moment, the situation is that we've gone out to a team, as JP says, Declan, who are captained by Sviatchenko. Now, this is a point I made last night. I like Eric Sviatchenko. There's a funny wee story about when he signed, and I was in a conversation with him, and I made Ian Bankier wait to welcome the new signing to Celtic Football Club. It was quite funny, but that's because he was so polite that he actually wanted to speak to a Celtic supporter before talking to the chairman. So I've got a lot of time for Eric Sviatchenko, but I wasn't that upset when he left Celtic Football Club, and I wasn't that enamoured when we were potentially linked with him this pre-season, Declan. However, he completely marked Odsonne Edouard out the game last night, had him in his back pocket. So there's an issue with your system where you can take a player who I don't think should be a first pick at Celtic, he maybe would get a game at the moment, and that player absolutely nullifies who should be your biggest threat last night. What did you make of that last night on both parts? The fact that, you know, we know Sviatchenko inside out. Every player on that park who's played with him knows his weaknesses. They've seen him on a training park. We all know he's slow, he's immobile, right? But he was still able to play. So he could play Edouard because he knew Edouard. Edouard couldn't play him. I found that one of the biggest disappointments last night, I've got to say.
Yeah, and you actually, on Twitter, you've seen how much it meant to Midtjylland last night. They've got a photo up in the dressing room and they're all huddled around it. So it kind of shows how much it meant to them as a club. And again, they're a club who, I think Dom Mackay, you know, when these first press conferences spoke about, you know, comparing ourselves to, I looked at the methods of Brentford and Midtjylland. Midtjylland have set up a fee-paying school, I think, that they want to develop you as a person, not just as a football player in terms of leadership qualities and everything else. They're only 22 years of age. They're on a journey, then they have clear direction in that journey, something I think we badly lack. But yeah, you know, testament to Eric Sviatchenko last night. I thought he played well. And again, you know, was that in the part of Edouard just maybe not really, you know, his head being elsewhere? Because, you know, probably if last night wasn't his last game, Saturday ultimately probably will. I do imagine the player will make that switch to Brighton. So I don't know if it's on that part, but certainly in terms of preparation, in terms of linkages, you know, Sviatchenko would have got a game in that Celtic back four last night. And again, it just sums up the whole situation of players that we could have had, we did have, and let go to put us in a situation where we're having to rely on two young lads playing at centre back last night.
Now, there's another youngish player playing in the defence last night as well, JP, and I'm going to bring it up, right? Because, yeah, we can talk about the goalkeeper situation. We can talk about that famous quote that came from JP Mason, that his head's out the door and his boots can follow him. And we're now saying that about Edouard, probably. But, you know, Anthony Ralston comes in for an incredible amount of criticism. I know his limitations. I think he actually knows his limitations. Last night, I couldn't find any kind of criticism to be levied at Anthony Ralston, and I think it's only fair that you praise where praise is due. And I thought he equipped himself particularly well. You know, he can hit a byline and get a crossover, showed that quite a few times. He's brave, he's committed, he threw himself in front of a couple of shots that might have given Bain something to think about. Mm-hmm. Is it about time that we realised that, you know, he's become a bit of a whipping boy, isn't he, JP?
He has. But I think it's people always add in the sort of caveat that, you know, it's not his fault. It's not. It's we're not. Nobody's having a real go at him for not playing at the standards that we maybe think a Celtic right back should be playing at. I would have no problem with Anthony Ralston being a squad member or being backup right back or playing a number of games in domestic football. I just don't think that he's potentially good enough, to go beyond what we would have gone beyond last night. If we'd have faced PSV, for example, PSV would have been a completely different prospect, and then beyond that, Champions League. I think was there even another round after that? There probably wasn't there? I think there was maybe. Was there another round after PSV? I don't know. Maybe there was.
There would have been another round after PSV.
Yeah, right. So you've got another challenge after that, and then the actual Champions League itself. So without any disrespect to Anthony Ralston, should he be starting in the Champions League group stage for Celtic? Absolutely no way. I don't think so. But, I thought he played well last night. He played well against a not great Midtjylland team. Do you know what I mean? They weren't miles and miles ahead of us. We took them to extra time. We took them to extra time with that defence. That's wild that happened, really, to be honest. And I think that's credit to Postecoglou. And we've not apportioned any blame on this show to him, and I don't think nor should there be. Maybe some people do have doubts over him based on last night. I certainly don't. And if anything, I've got more confidence in him because of last night, because we didn't embarrass ourselves. Yes, we lost two, preventable goals. We lost preventable goals because of an inexperienced defence, which he was forced to play. Yeah,
I actually think the most experienced defender was the guy who switched off for the first goal. I thought Greg Taylor was way out of position. The boy had 5 or 6 yards on him, and it shouldn't happen at that stage of your career as a defender, because you're a defender first and foremost. So, no, you're absolutely right there. And again, fine margins, JP, Jamesy Forrest, couple of chances, they go up, and they really are ruthless, and we've seen that so often in Europe. I think there's going to be a lot of comments like this coming through from the Celtic support. Marty McKay, the board is morphing into the Kellys and the Whites at breakneck speed. I can only assume that they make more personal wealth from player transfers than the club qualifying for the Champions League. Now, the reason I bring it up is because obviously I remember the Kellys and the Whites, and I remember the takeover and going to the games throughout that entire period. And being totally immersed in the fanzine culture that became your Bible, JP, because I was a young kid at the time, and people that knew a lot more about business and football and Celtic than I did were informing me. It was almost an education, and you got that education on the supporters bus all the way through from Fife, and then in the pages of the fanzines on the way home. And that's how you kind of digested info. Nowadays you listen to podcasts and you can form opinions or strengthen opinions or disagree with people that way. Back then, I think that the whole fanzine culture was very important in the way that my mind was almost politicised to the way that a football club's run, because at that age I should have been thinking about Paul McStay and all that kind of stuff and winning trophies, but I'm thinking about the Taylor report and building new stadiums and takeovers and going public. And for someone who's Canvas Lang, I remember the front cover.
The horse with the ground, and he put a horse on it for 2 weeks. I think Kevin Kelly, to prove that it wasn't chemicals on it.
I didn't know
That's outrageous.
The horse in the ground for
Brilliant.
2 weeks, I think. It's in one of the books. You see him standing with the horse. He phoned up somebody and he said, I know somebody that's got a horse, we'll put that on it and that'll prove that the ground's fine.
Only Celtic. Back then, only Celtic.
To that horse, by the way, it seemed to disappear hell of a quickly.
But the reason I bring it up is, as much as you look back on that situation, and rightly so, because the club was not being run properly, I don't think it was due to any kind of deceitful kind of means. It wasn't as though there was any doubt that the people, the Whites and the Kellys, obviously they'd been born into a football club. That there was a whole dynasty of their family within that football club. It's just that they did not have the competence to run a club. at that stage, JP. You know, the people at the club didn't have the competence, the business acumen. They didn't have the wealth to invest in the club. They tried to make changes by bringing people like Brian Dempsey and David Dallas-Smith and Terry Cassidy because they thought that they had the wealth and the business acumen, and that didn't work either. And eventually it all tapered away. What happened back then is that there was a real no confidence amongst a huge amount of the supporters in the Celtic board. What's different this time round, Declan, I would suggest, is that it's suggested by the comments made by Ange Postecoglou that there's a no confidence from within the club. On the football side of the club, we don't know Don Mackay's thoughts on it. JP alluded to that earlier. Surely him walking into that situation would be unhappy with it as well. I'm pretty sure that is the case, but we can't confirm that. But it is slightly different this time round, Declan, because you know, it's not just the supporters who are unhappy with the way the club's being run.
Yeah, there's an internal problem being, you know, big red flags getting waved at us last night. And as I said earlier, you know, the board probably benefited from a shield that they had in that time of the 90s. You know, Lou McCarry and whoever else wasn't coming out and criticising the board, obviously. Billy McNeil loses his job, but walks out the front door to kind of say, you know, get nothing to really, you know, say that I shouldn't walk out the front door here. But, you know, the other guys in positions there but before the takeover, you know, probably didn't criticise the board like Lou McCarry or Brady. Whereas at this point in time, we've got the manager waving a big red flag. And again, you know, how much influence and power does Don Mackay actually have within that building at this moment in time? Is Dermot Desmond still directing traffic from his hotel, probably wherever he is, and pulling strings if he's not playing golf or watching horse racing? So I don't really know the influence and control that they have in the boardroom. And again, that is a worry. But if the manager can't cut through, then I think we're in for a real heck of a ride.
Declan, you've told me something I didn't know about the club, and I love that. And it happens a lot where people give you wee bits of information. I cannot remember the picture of, would it have been Michael or Kevin Kelly with a horse at Cambuslang? Kevin Kelly. I'm going to have to dig that out. I've got most of the books around about that period. But obviously it started up the discussion, Shergar. At that point, it probably wasn't even a real horse. It would have been a pantomime horse. And there would have been somebody at the front and the back, wouldn't there? Because Celtic were a bit of a pantomime back then. JP, we've spoken about the heads out the door, the feet should follow. What's your thought on Edouard at the moment, JP?
You know, it's been so frustrating, like the last year, just watching players, I guess, not being in the stadium. And I guess I never thought I would see Odsonne Edouard play a game for Celtic again. I'd kind of resigned myself to the fact that he would probably leave as soon as the transfer window opened. But it's obviously it's not the case that players are just getting moves at the moment like they would maybe want to, because I've said this before, I still think the transfer market is in a weird state of flux. I don't think it's as, you see the sort of money they're flying about down in England. It's not flying about as readily, I don't think, as it has been in the past. I think they're being very wary. And I certainly would have thought that we would have been looking to sell Odsonne Edouard to a higher calibre of club than Brighton. No disrespect to Brighton, but I mean, come on. When we've seen Edouard flying, there's absolutely no way you'd be thinking, oh, well, maybe he could get a move to Brighton. You know, you're thinking a higher ceiling than that for him. So I don't know. I find it very hard to get anti-Edouard. And last night, I don't think he obviously didn't play well. He didn't score, and he didn't really have a lot of opportunities to score when he should have had against, you know, a defence that he should be having joy against. Like you said, Sviatchenko knows him. He knows Sviatchenko. Why did he not? You know, why did the players not say this is his weaknesses? You know, go for this, go for that. You know, it just seems strange. But
it does, JP. That, you know, the point that was made after the first leg is that Stephen Welsh gives away a free kick. Sviatchenko goes over and speaks to the free kick taker and tells him that keeper's rubbish. You know, he says something in his ear, right? Now, Sviatchenko didn't even play with Barkas, you know, but anybody who's watched Celtic over the last 18 months, and I know Sviatchenko keeps an eye on the club, of course he does. We've had an impact on him, and he's always speaks so highly of Celtic. So he's given him a wee bit of info there. These are players that have played and trained with Sviatchenko over a period of time, JP. And we should know his weaknesses. And there are weaknesses in his game. Somebody piped up there earlier to say that PSV are going to take them to the cleaners. I think they probably will. I think PSV will take Midtjylland to the cleaners.
100%.
And I always want Celtic to progress. Of course I do. But it could have got a wee bit embarrassing, unless we strengthen in a big, big way between now and the next set of fixtures. Because these fixtures come in so quickly, JP, as well. We're going to ask a few questions about upcoming games. Big one Saturday night, Declan McConville. Have you any concerns about that? It's a different game entirely. Starfelt should be in the building by then.
Yeah, I think he'll probably play on Saturday. Again, I kind of, fire him right into a game that a place it's always difficult to go to. I'm sure Hearts will probably be out to get a bit of revenge on us as well after the Scottish Cup final last year. They'll make it a bit of a difficult game. So that will come into it. Again, it's always it's a good away day, Tynecastle. There's not going to be any Celtic fans in there. I believe there's going to be 2,000 Jambos fans and 5,000, even worse. 5,000 Jambos fans in Tynecastle. So I'm sure they'll make a bit of an atmosphere. It's we'll see how players' character, but again, it's always a tough place to go in. As I say, I'm sure Hearts will probably have their tails up after missing out so narrowly to us in the Scottish Cup final last year. So it's going to be tough, but we need to pick ourselves right back up and maybe putting Starfelt in there, a bit of experience and another player in the door, likely not. But we'll just wait and see it, because Kurahashi could maybe make his debut off the bench. I don't know. I think he flew in on the 20th of July, so probably about isolation on Friday. Whether they make the bench for Saturday evening's another story, another question. But it's going to be tough place to go.
Any other changes based on the two Midtjylland games, Deck? Any other changes that you'd make?
Again, I think they lack depth in the squad, Paul. So I don't know what changes you probably would be able to make. Whether Shaw would maybe come into the team. I didn't. Again, you'd be dropping Soren, but it would probably be a bit harsh. Again, I thought Abada played well. Christie had a shift. So Drogic never did anything when he came on last night.
2 goals and goals.
Yeah, he never did it.
It's a good point.
Probably the same.
It's a good point, because I said this last night, because Brian is very much of the view that we play or buy a keeper that plays to Ange's strengths, and I think it's a good argument, a very good argument that he makes very well. When I see Bain getting the ball at the edge of his box, though, and trying to do things that if it was a centre-half doing them right in front of a striker, you would have your heart in your mouth, shimmying and all this kind of stuff, JP. I'm not buying into that. Now, I can see why the sweeper keeper is something in the modern game that you want to have to retain possession. But, sometimes it is better to clear your lines, isn't it? And some people might think I'm being old-fashioned. I'd much rather that than Bain at the edge of his box trying to take on a player. I don't like seeing that from a goalkeeper.
No, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And I was really surprised that he played Bain last night over Barkas. I thought he would Barkas' confidence now must be... if it was shot before getting dropped for that game last night, there was no talk of an injury. He was on the bench, so he was clearly fit. It was a tactical decision, and a decision based on his mindset or whatever. As a result of Saturday, I really was surprised by that, and it does say a lot about what's going on behind the scenes with Barkas. He really must be struggling, I would imagine, because otherwise you'd expect him to be like putting his hand up saying, no, I want to play this game, blah blah blah, but that's not what happened. And
again, I've seen this to Alex Ferguson, sorry to interrupt, JP, and the film about him, there's a story in it with Jim Leighton. Can't mind what FA Cup final it is, and I think it's Palace in 1990. And he drops him because he's in the right place, and since then, for 31 years, Jim Leighton's never spoken to Sir Alex Ferguson since that. So
I think I read that. Yeah,
as you're saying, in terms of relationship there between the manager, he's dropped him now, and I don't know if there's going to be any way back for him after that now.
It's just, but there's been yo-yo goalkeeper for so long. Last season there was a different keeper all the time, and 1 minute Lennon's saying he's my number one, and then the next thing he's out, and then
we're back to the same. We're doing the same.
And see, just before I forget, how there was the chat that Dermot Desmond was apparently miffed at Hampden that day in the semi-final, and the story goes that, you know, he saw the Rangers chairman or whoever they were celebrating, and he was like, right, this isn't happening again. Let's put our foot on their neck and, you know, destroy them basically, and then we won the next 4 trebles. Mm-hmm. Why does he not get annoyed about the European losses in the same manner, or does he just, is it too deep? Does he have to go too deep into his pocket to actually to correct a European situation? Because a European situation, we are miles behind in Europe, and currently we're miles behind in domestically as well. If you go on last season, the fact that we finished with nothing and 25 points behind Rangers, but we are so far behind in Europe, it would take a lot of money, a serious amount of money, to get us competing at Champions League level if you're talking short-term fix. So I think it's almost like, no, I can't go that deep in my pockets to do that. So I'll just let it keep happening.
I think you're right. I do. I just don't think that comes into the strategy at all, and that's part of the problem.
Surely, if you're irked at a defeat to a lower league side in a national competition on penalty kicks at Hampden, surely you look at that result last night and you get mad with that, and you're like, wait a minute, these guys are minnows, you know, Cluj, Ferencvaros, these guys. We're Celtic. We shouldn't be getting beat off these teams in qualifying matches.
But I think that's what the obsession of the domestic games did to us over the past 10 years.
You
know,
that pretty good.
That long list of Maribors, Malmos, Cluj, Ferencvaros, Athens, last night to add to it, and it's became that, you know, we just focused too much on the domestic game. It's all very well us fans having an obsession with 10 in a row, as it was, but for the board, it became an obsession that then they just switched off, and they switched off in the last few seasons of that, but switched off altogether in European football. It's the same last season when we were getting horsed by Sparta Prague, and even to go back to Ronnie going out that second season to Malmo, that European success or failure doesn't merit whether you keep your job or lose your job, because it's kind of like a free hit to Celtic managers at this point in time. European football, it appears.
It seems that way. It seems as though the club have completely different objectives and ambitions when it comes to European football than a huge amount of the Celtic fan base. Declan, and you said horse again, so you've obviously got a horse on the mind. You're going to have to dig out that picture of Kevin Kelly's horse for me.
I'll find it.
Absolutely. Before we go, I've just got to declare my love of JP's Celtic away strip. I remember it well, the wee velvety badge. It's got that velvety texture, isn't it?
Well, it's hard. Oh, it does, and it's just, I thought, well, it's harking back to, there's been a lot of 90s chat today about, you know, Celts for change and sack the board and whatnot. So what better top to have on for that time?
Absolutely. I remember, though, if you're going to go for a run, you know, it's a bit like sandpaper behind that crest, JP, so be careful. Thanks, everybody, for joining us in the comment section on YouTube, Twitter and Facebook. It's always a pleasure. Thanks for getting involved. We're on every single weekday at 12:30. This is A Celtic State of Mind. Thank you to Declan McConville and JP Mason. We'll be back at 12:30 tomorrow.